Well, hi, I'm back for the Meadow Lounge Part 2. I found Dr. Lizellen. Guess what? She was on her page doing a live. Don't you love that? So cute. I'm like, hello. Just like Kels, who was here before. I said, hey, bring me up. There you are back, Kels. Okay, good. Here she comes. Okay. I'm going to grab her right on her thing. She was right there. Hi, Tracy. uh, Giving her talk, and I'm like, hey, you're supposed to be on my page. Here she comes. There she is.
Got it? Sorry about that, Julie. We've got it on all sorts of pages now.
I know you were doing it. I love it. You were all set up, ready to go, giving your thing. I'm like, hey, come on over on my side. Come over to my neighborhood and let's have this conversation.
Really?
How are you, Dr. Lizellen?
I had a very busy morning, as you can imagine, so I was worried I was late.
Well, no, you were right on time. You were just in a different neighborhood. So I'm glad you're here. Come on over to Berkeley. You are in Greenbrae, where you are, right? So
just a mere bridge away, Julie.
I can see you right out my window right there. So I'm so glad to have you and for making time for us. I mean, if everyone here, in case you don't know, but I don't know how you don't know, Dr. Lizellen La Follette is a globally renowned OB/GYN, an expert in all things women health, from delivering babies. Did you deliver Barb Sobel's babies, our clinical nutritionist?
I mean, I only try to, by the way, only deliver the cute ones. So by definition, yes.
I love that. I'm glad you know that ahead of time.
Yeah.
Fortunately, you didn't deliver my babies, but at least they're cute. So, but next time I have a baby, which is going to be never, I would come to you, but it's okay. But Dr. Seriously, La Follette also is on the board of the Buck Institute of Aging, which just keeps her on the cutting edge of all the things that are happening to us as we transition into post-menopause, on. So I'm so honored to have you. I think we met at Naomi Watts' event like a year ago, maybe. And so
Exactly right.
so glad to have you here. Well, we made this promise about today we're going to talk about all things, basically the comprehensive guide to menopause and some solutions for those symptoms. And so that's a really huge topic that you and I bantered about. So I'd love to just kind of jump in and kind of start with symptoms, because we know that there's a lot over 34, and then if you ask anybody else, maybe there's more. So first of all, how many symptoms do you think there are in your mind, in your practice?
Could actually put a ceiling on that question, because everyone goes through this differently, and since they're experiencing different symptoms in their own body, they all have to be taken into account. I typically will tell patients, give me the top 5 that are bugging you in order, because that'll help me understand their priority. But all sorts of stuff, and I don't think anybody should underestimate the joint component, the ache component, the brain component, the component of generally feeling anxious and a sense of dread when you wake up. All of those symptoms are ones that have been talked about. But when you get in front of individual women the way I do every day, I think it's really important to recognize they haven't been heard. So I don't care what the list is or how long the list is. We have spent today just writing down the list, and if that's the components that are bothering them, those all have to be taken into consideration when we actually talk about therapies and helping.
Wow, I love the way you put it, package it into components. And we know that menopause is so individual, the whole transition from peri to post and beyond. And I think I love of course you're right, that just putting a number on symptoms, because we're all so different in the way they blend together, or it really puts us in a box, and we are not in a box, that's for sure. But then framing it up as components, all these sort of big buckets that these symptoms live in, I think is so awesome. So what are you seeing when women come to you and they're like, oh, I'm struggling? What are you seeing most often that women are prioritizing in those top 5 symptoms?
So I have to first say that most women are coming to see me because they haven't been heard. So in my office, office, as you may know, Julie, everybody gets a half an hour. There's no phones in the rooms. There's no computers in the rooms.
Wow.
Good portion of that half hour is me listening. All right? Nobody interrupts me. I mean, if a baby comes into the world, maybe, but not often, because I try to make sure I'm in the office and not on call at the same time. And so, though that ability to say, tell me what's bothering you and what do you think are the top priorities is kind of the most important.
That's huge.
There are
Huge. We know women get 15 minutes, and the minute they start talking about menopause, they have to make another appointment because it's not part of the wellness appointment that they're there for. Horrible. So that's beautiful. 30 minutes.
And it's not only 30 minutes, right? I'm talking to them about their symptoms. I'm also trying to
Dedicated.
make sure that they have their bone density, that they have, if they need, hormonal levels, and that's not necessarily because I want to know what their levels are as a starting point, but I want to prove that it isn't something else other than menopause. So I think there is a component here that we can get blood work to help us navigate moving forward, recognizing that in cycling women, every single day of the week, their hormones are different. So that caveat. But the other part has to do with if you have a competitive athlete and she comes in and sees me and is starting to skip periods, right? She's going to tell you her joints ache, right? That's her priority, right? She's been a competitive athlete all her life. She doesn't want to be in a circumstance in which she can't move, right? But if you have somebody who has had a traumatic brain injury, their component's going to be their brain isn't working. And you read the books of Lisa Mosconi and the female brain, that brain is desperately trying to hold on to estrogen. The receptors get more and more as they reach menopause and perimenopause for estrogen to land there for the synaptic connections. So for us as providers, we need to understand each component that can affect a woman, and there are many, and then go through, okay, what's bothering you the most? How can I help? And you do it in pieces. Because sometimes if you add everything all at once, you're not going to know what really made a big difference. So I try to break it down. Is sleep part of the problem? Is libido part of the problem? And then talk to that individual and try to piece it back together, recognizing we're not fixing this in one day. And the conversation is going to come back in 6 to 8 weeks. You're going to get that same half an hour with me. We're going to go through how you're feeling better, how you might not be feeling better, and we're going to go puzzle by puzzle piece together to fit it.
Wow, that is so transformational, because taking a woman's experience, talking, you said at the beginning, like she's being seen and heard for the first time, and not just like, okay, here's your HRT because now you won't have hot flashes and this and this and that, versus, okay, what's bothering you based on your life experience? I never thought about it that way. And if you're an athlete, you're right. Like certain things are going to bother you more. Like maybe you do have hot flashes, but you don't really care about that. You can deal with that because it's about, oh, I can't run, or brain injury. I can't think or remember. It's so like, yeah, because I think we get into the whole hot flashes, sleeplessness, and weight gain. Bing, those are the three things that people complain about the most, but not really when they're being heard. Or maybe.
And for example, today I saw somebody who was a dancer, you know, on point and everything, a competitive dancer, right? And she had had an injury, and she's having aches and pains, and she went back to the orthopedic surgeon, who of course did all the x-rays, and turns out the injury is fine. It was 20 years ago, but she's still achy. Okay, well, what's that? That's a component of having less estrogen. But did the orthopedic surgeon put it together? Should they have? Maybe. But it's our job as OBGYNs to say, all of the components that are physically and mentally affecting you can be part of the hormonal and menopausal transition. And the important thing about that transition is it's over time, and some things at the beginning may really bother you, and at the end may have nothing to do with how you're feeling. So not only is each individual a puzzle piece to put together, but time also changes what those pieces are and how.
It's a transition.
Yes.
And isn't it heartbreaking how many women don't get access to a doctor like you, and they are just one size fits all, if they actually get seen and get some kind of support.
Not only is medicine broken on the interaction between doctors and women, and I'm going to say women because I'm sure it may be broken for men, but remember, as an OBGYN, I'm going to state the elephant in the room. I'm only taking care of women. That's it. So for an OBGYN to tell you they don't know anything about menopause, well, what the heck? They're taking care of women. That's from teenage all the way until death. And so that's a long transition, of which menopause is smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
So all of those components for an OBGYN need to be considered. But one of the problems I have is, why haven't we engendered and asked and pushed to continue to get better education? So as you've heard from many of my colleagues who are, like me, board certified OBGYNs, every year we have to do 50 questions on these new articles that they've selected for us and get a certain percentage to maintain board certification. Okay, every year. All right. Now, what are the topics? Emerging health issues, like, for example, COVID and how it affects women. Population studies related to, bone density and mammogram and all of these recommendations on public health as screening tools. Obstetrics, gynecology in terms of bleeding and IUDs and STIs, and office visits, right? Now, did you see in there that menopause? I mean,
not at all.
Where are you going to put it? You should put it in office. You should put it in gynecology. Probably not in obstetrics yet, right? But there should be a topic of halfway through life, things change, right, and let's understand it. Now, let's just talk about heart disease, right?
Yes, please, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. That's part of why MenoWell came. We have hypertension in our family, and as women, we're always terrified of breast cancer, which understandable, but it's heart disease that takes us out, and we barely talk about heart disease.
So a couple things are interesting. The American Heart Association is starting to wake up with their Go Red routine, which is so interesting. It's a whole campaign related to Go Red, but one of the things that's interesting is that it wasn't until 2020 that the American Heart Association in circulation published the point that menopause changes heart disease risk from that point forward. Now, 330,000 women died of heart disease or stroke in 2020. 47 died of breast cancer, 47,000. So 330,000 versus 47,000. That is 7-to-1 heart disease or stroke compared to breast cancer. So, wow, right? Wow. Yeah. We have the emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? Right. Syllable would be bone health, heart health, sleep health, exercise. Those are the components of longevity that luckily the Buck has been studying for 20 years, the Buck Institute of Aging up in Nevada. And that's the component of the basic science that is now starting to get into mainstream medicine to understand that if you have slow amounts of inflammation in your system, that may lead to a problem, whether it's a narrowing of the arteries in terms of heart disease, whether it is a precancerous change of your cervix or breast or uterus or any place in your body. All of those inflammatory heads up are the initiators of disease that we need to focus on correcting before they become a disease. So the prevention then becomes so much more important. So not only are women being ignored about hormones at the transition of their lives, but if you look at the statistics, we're going to live until we're 80, and I would put upon you that most of us will live to 90 and 100, in which case we're smack dab in the middle of our lives. Right. So make the second half of our lives as good as the first half, or better.
Okay, you're setting off all kinds of things in my brain. One, I love that you said that the menopause transition is in the middle, right? It's not at the end. It's not like we're, on our way out the door, so we don't need to have any health support because, we're done anyway. It's like we're only halfway there. And so we stop getting the care and attention that we need in the middle. Like, that makes no sense. Yeah. And so pin in that. And I know we call it midlife, but I still think healthcare as an entity sees it way at the end, not in the middle. us. And then the idea that prevention supports a better menopause transition also, don't you think? Nutrition, moving our bodies, all those good things, along with supporting our heart health and keeping our inflammation down. What do you think?
Exactly. And one of the things that's so interesting is if you start to look at prevention as a priority, then as things start to change in the perimenopause and then menopause, we can really make a difference in terms of decreasing inflammation, improving exercise, improving cognitive function in terms of all those components, maximizing your exercise output, understanding your continuous glucose monitoring. There's all sorts of things that, unfortunately, many of them have been in the, I would say, bro world of longevity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be, and let me suggest to you that I will be the girl world of longevity from the perspective of women and life and health.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start owning prevention as part of our living standard to continue to do well.
Yeah.
And, you know, why are we not seen? I mean, if you remember what Naomi Watts said really on about menopause, is she was worried she was not sexually attractive enough to be on camera because she, having had changes in her menstrual cycle early, felt as though that meant that she would not be seen.
Right.
And the idea that we as women in midlife and beyond are not seen is inexcusable.
Right. Which is why we're focused on breast cancer, because that is part of our sexuality or perceived sexuality. And so, but you know, if we don't have breasts, if we are having a heart attack, stroke, and are dead, then it doesn't matter what our breasts look like, you know,
Right.
Irrelevant. So, wow. Prevention, getting back early. So that means talking to women in perimenopause when they first come, or they raise their hand at some point saying, I don't feel good, I don't feel like myself. But is it, you know, what about those in the middle who are already there? What about inflammation? Let's talk about, I know you're an expert in inflammatory diseases. And so how do we change our behaviors at any point once we realize, this is a huge lever that we have to eat better, feel better, and then help our heart so we don't become victims of really a cardiac event?
Right. So I think we have to recognize that the simplest solution in decreasing inflammation is movement. So if you listen to the Buck Institute of Aging, Eric Verdun has been on many shows, and he's the president CEO of the Buck. And he is a scientist by training, an MD. And one of the things that's interesting is he talks about, to change your life, you need to walk 20 minutes a day. I think one of the problems of people not starting is they think they have to become this unbelievable athlete who's lifting weights and looking like something they never looked like, which, by the way, isn't about health. That's about something else again.
Aesthetic.
Right?
That's right. Too,
Start simple. 20 minutes a day. But do it religiously. Hold yourself accountable. There are some wonderful books about good choices and making sure that you hold yourself accountable by getting better habits, right? This idea of the healthy habit and the teeny habits idea that came out of Stanford is you brush your teeth every day. If you really want to floss, you connect that flossing to the thing that you're already doing. Write down the habits that you do every day. You take a shower, you get dressed. You want to do something different? Get on the floor and do 10 crunches, right? Add flossing to the teeth hygiene, right? Get out and look at the sun. Recognize you live in this Bay Area in a very beautiful place, and we really don't have to worry about snow. There is no reason to not walk out the door.
And even folks in the snowy areas, you know, they know how to walk in the snow. They're good. They have the right shoes and coats.
Just get right? Get out. And as you add components to decrease inflammation, movement are the top three. I mean, it's amazing how little it takes to make a difference. Now, if you want to add that and weight loss, then you will have to increase the ante. You will have to change the components of how you eat, adding more protein, more fiber. And Mary Claire Haber talks about this enormously in all of her books. And I think that's really a very good education. But the problem is, if you become overwhelmed with the recommendation, you're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Start simple. Walk. Start.
I love that. I think you hit on a good point. There's so much information that I do believe people get overwhelmed, and we get into this thing, well, I'm not going to do anything until I figure out what the perfect magic thing is. And it's just outside and it's free. And I love what you're talking about, habit stacking. So I find that, even I can get into that mode of like, oh, how do I get my 20-minute walk a day? But I usually go to the mailbox every day. And so if I don't walk there, I make sure I walk around the block when I get there to get my walk in. So they're together. I'm already out. I'm doing, because many of us are at our desk all day long. You're probably on your feet more than most people. So you're just getting it in, doing your work.
Well, I'm rounding, I'm going over to catch a baby, I'm making sure I don't drive over to the hospital, which is, a half a mile down the road, not even, right, a quarter of a mile down the road. I make sure that if, for example, you want to get your cup of coffee, and certainly this was a lot pre-pandemic, do not park in front of the coffee shop. Park at the other end of the parking lot and walk.
Yes.
Make sure you run over, so you have to be careful about parking lots. But in general, that's a simple way to add steps. 5 minutes at a time. You all of a sudden have a break between lunch and the rest of your day. Take a walk. So people will be able to add habits that'll make their life healthier if they stop putting so much pressure on themselves that it has to be perfect. We are tweaking over time. That time is 50 years.
Right. It's like putting money, it's like savings, you don't have to save a whole ton, but it's the consistency that adds up. Next thing you know, boom, have a nice big bank account. Same thing with our helping decrease our inflammatory bodies that we live in our society today with stress and everything else. Huge. I think it's so simple that we just like, oh, it's too simple, it's not worth it, we're not going to do it. We just look for the hard thing. Speaking to myself, I always look for the hard thing. I like the hard thing. And sometimes I overlook the simple things, right? Just to get it done. So good.
Well,
okay.
When we start to talk about brain health, there's a wonderful book called Healthy Brains, Happy Lives by Suzuki. She grew up in Sunnyvale and is a PhD in neuroscience. Woke up somewhere around 45 or 50, realized that she now has her professorship and she hasn't gotten out of the lab, and she's gained 30 pounds, and she's not particularly happy. So people can identify with that, no problem.
Happens all the
right?
time, right?
So what does she do? She loves to dance. Okay, why can't we all dance? I mean, add something you love to do. Right. I don't care how old you are. If you love to dance, that is going to feed your brain, and your brain will be happier because you are happier. And that's important. Joy in itself is one of those things that we don't have enough of. And let joy, whether it's through movement, whether it's through relationships, all of these blue zones, let us be blue zone Bay Area, right, have connections. And part of those connections are joyous and happy. And that makes a huge difference also on the prevention front.
I love that. And in some ways, these are all things that help us transition through menopause better, right? When we move our bodies, when we eat better, we get in our fiber, we get in our protein. We don't need to make a big deal about it. I mean, that's why I created MenoWell bars, because I would struggle with that, right? So I need to get that fiber in, without thinking about it. And then connecting with our friends, like simple things like that, make our transition better. And then we can, because I always say, especially with hormone replacement, it's important for a lot of women, but also you still have to have that holistic approach, right? A to Z, not just one patch, one pill, one cream, or whatever you're doing. All those things, you have to take care of ourselves from all perspectives.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about when you work with someone and you ask them about their symptoms, you talk to me about a diary. You have them keep a diary of their symptoms. Can you talk about that? And how can women that are listening use that strategy for themselves?
So I think one of the problems that's happening with all these transitions is things come up, and they may not be every day, but you don't always remember them when you're coming in to see the doctor. So I think the best way to get the most out of your visit is to create a diary and say, could this be perimenopause? Could this be? And so write it down so that when you are then in front of a provider, you have an ability to go, now hang on, I want to know about this. Today, for example, we had somebody we saw who had an enormous list of things. And some of them may be perimenopause, many may be, some of them may not be, but she had the list. Well, once I have the list from you, we can talk about, is there a difference between brain health, brain fog, and hormonal loss? And the answer, you bet there is. Is there a difference from cardiovascular risk and movement and joint problems? You bet there is. So this linking together of the symptoms that are coming off of your diary allows women to understand that these components all fit together in the puzzle that is their body and their mental health. And I think it's very important, don't assume that it may not be connected. Because again, I'm not making a list of what the symptoms are.
Yeah.
They're 150. They could all be connected because they're in the body of the person who's in front of me.
Huge. I always say that menopause, one of the gifts of the menopausal transition is it reconnects us to our bodies, because it's so cranky that it's like, hello, look at me, you're taking care of this person and that person. It's my time. And so, but then we forget, right? Or, move on to something else, different feeling. And so that diary sounds just really helpful. I wish I had that one. I was going through my transition. I'm postmenopausal now, but I guess, I could still track how I feel, because I still feel some days great, some days not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the best things about menopause from the perspective of the women that are talking about sex and bladder function and prolapse and all this other stuff, whether that's Kelly Casperson, whether that's Mary Claire Haber, the most important thing about this is, for some reason, right around 50, women come in and talk to me and go, okay, now what's working with what? How do I get to have sexual satisfaction? It's as though whatever anatomy lesson they learned in high school, they really want to review because they never got that, right?
Because we moved on and, we just are having babies and everything is, tactics and logistics. And now we're like, oh, time to take care of me.
Right.
Yeah.
But the education of what it takes to be able to have sexual satisfaction is a conversation that the puritanical American medical system has long ignored. And we have to take back that night from the perspective of making sure that we ask. So at 50, am I doing more education than I was necessarily in teenagers? It's the same education, but they're taking it in because they know it could be better. And what are the things they can control, and what are the things hormones can control, and what are the things can their partner control? And that's really important. It's like awakening of anatomy in addition to function.
Right. I love that you said awakening, because that is what's happening. That is that reconnection, and we learn that, but you're like, okay. But now it matters. It matters, especially if you're in a new relationship or a long-term relationship, or you just want to have all your parts healthy, not drying up. So shout out to estradiol, but yes.
How they work together. And if you think about community and you think about joy and you think about longevity, sex is part of it. It's part of it for our partners. It's part of it for us. And let's not forget that that can be great joy and positive impact in our lives. And that if it isn't, there are ways to talk about it and to make it better.
Yeah.
And so to think about the components of joy and community, that's our job as educators to women's health and for women, is to make sure all of the components that can give joy are talked about.
I love that. And I bet people thought they're coming here for a conversation about hormone replacement therapy. I think this is so important in this perspective, because we talk about, well, maybe you and I talk about it a lot because we're always in this menopause conversation. I think we still need to talk about patches and hormone replacement and all those things, but we don't talk enough about this sort of holistic approach to being happy in life, because without that, all the pharmaceuticals in the world are not going to make our lives better.
And one of the things that I think we have to hear from the people that are talking about longevity is the menopause transition and changes happen in the perimenopause and menopausal timeline. But you have the rest of your life to get the other components of longevity and health. So let it be the beginning of a conversation that lasts 2 generations, 40 years, 50 years, right? So I think it's very important for people to understand that although the menopausal transition right now is front and center on many people's minds, some people are way past that and didn't have that conversation.
Right.
So they need to be talking about what can they do to make sure that they have a healthy, long health span. And if you look at our priority as providers and science in general, we want to prolong health span, and then if we get something, we're off the planet. So this idea that we're all living longer, but we aren't all living better. And so we've all gotten that extra 20 years. If you look at the demographics of life and lifespan, is we're 20 years older than our parents. But in those 20 years, are we able to do what we want? Are we getting joy? Can we move? Do we have orthopedic problems? Do we have cognitive function problems? That's the stuff we want to minimize so that we continue to have a full life right up until something happens at the end.
That's the joy right there. That's the ticket. That's what we're searching for. I have wonderful role models. My parents are in their 80s, 83 and 85. I know your dad's in his 90s. You know, my dad golfs 3 days a week and my mom walks. They are so active. I think they look younger than we do because they are active and they have friends and they're going on a trip tomorrow, you know, to Oregon and doing all the things. And so I know that they didn't really start that until they were in their 50s because they were doing all the things we're doing. But then my dad told me when he retired, he said that became my job. I knew my health was my job, and not in a bad way, right? Just focused on it. It's paid off, paid dividends. So
you think about the priorities, right? So they wanted to be good providers for you. They need to make sure you were launched and your siblings, right? And that was their priority. They need to make sure that they could pay the mortgage, that they could get all the bills done, right? So that's the sort of grind that we're in, right? Then you get retirement, like, okay, what's happening next?
Yeah.
The answer is better be a full life of joy and community, and that's our job to make sure we can help people for that.
I love that. So good, so good. Okay, I know we could talk all day, but maybe you have a baby to deliver or a menopausal woman to spend a half an hour with, which is double the time that most menopausal women get to spend with their doctor. So shout out to you, Dr. Lizellen. But how about a few tips that you can just toss over to our listeners as we wrap up today?
Okay, so tips to interact with providers or just in general. Symptom diary. Nothing is too little or too big to write in your diary. If you're wondering why it's happening, please write it down and let's discuss it. 2, make sure you get in front of somebody that's going to give you enough time for you to be able to get through the list and address them one at a time. 3, our focus in life is to prolong health span. That involves community and joy, and make sure that's part of the treatment going forward with menopause and perimenopause.
Beautiful.
5, remember there's a lot of different ways to do this. And if you don't feel as though you're being heard, and if you don't feel as though you're getting as many solutions as we are different people, then go to somebody who's listening.
Wow, 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 wow. Super fantastic, which I already know you're super fantastic, so I knew your tips would be. I just love this conversation about health span because it's the bigger conversation of the perimenopausal, menopause, postmenopausal transition. And we need to talk about it more, and heart disease. So good. Okay, last question. You know, our company is MenoWell. What does MenoWell mean to you?
So I have to say that I was thinking about MenoWell last night as we were talking about this talk. And I think one of the most important things has to do with the well. And because you really want all of the components of good nutrition in what you have created, which is so terrific. The menopause part to me is obviously used in the word menopause. And if you look at Luann Brisendine's idea of renaming menopause as the upgrade,
Right.
maybe we need to get rid of a few of the men's in our lives in terms of the words to be able to take back our own health. So it's both. It's the menopausal stuff for me, and it's the wellness that's the most important. But you've managed to put it together in something that everybody can have and can love and can taste. And that's one more step for us to be healthy. And so I appreciate it enormously.
Oh, thank you for that. I love your definition. And we just see the bars also beyond the nutrition as a signal to a woman, to herself, that I'm worth it, take care of my body. I got a long way to go here. So let's do this thing. So I love it. I'm so glad. I can't wait. We're still going to have lunch. I'm going to take a couple weeks. Of course, I'll be working the whole entire time, but in a different location. And but when I come back, please, 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 we promise we're going to get together for lunch, right? Okay. Thank you so much. And we're going to share clips of this because there's so much goodness here, right here with Dr. Lizellen La Follette, world-renowned specialist in women's health and longevity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Be well, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.